Hi, Adriana. Hi, can you hear me? Can you try speaking?
Are you hearing us?
Yes, perfect. Okay. Yeah, we can hear you.
Aquí estamos.
Have you said
Hi,
something?
Santiago. Hi.
Hi.
Right.
Okay, we're ready to start, so we're all available. So, Anna, I'll pass it on to you. We're just give me a second. Now people can hear us, everyone. So, Anna, you can start now.
Okay. Buenos días. Bienvenidos y muchas gracias por unirse a este webinar sobre las recomendaciones de la Agencia Internacional de Energía sobre eficiencia energética para México. Esta sesión se basa en una reciente publicación producida por la Agencia Internacional de Energía llamada Políticas Energéticas más allá de los países miembros de la IEA, la cual está disponible gratuitamente en el sitio de la agencia. La publicación se encuentra en idioma inglés, pero pronto también estará disponible en español. La publicación hace una revisión de las políticas energéticas de México y provee una serie de recomendaciones para diferentes sectores, incluyendo petróleo, gas natural, carbón, electricidad, energía renovable, energía nuclear, así como tecnologías energéticas, cambio climático y políticas de eficiencia energética. El webinar de hoy se enfocará solo en las recomendaciones de eficiencia energética. Este webinar es organizado por la Agencia Internacional de Energía con el valioso apoyo de la Secretaría de Energía, CENER. Mi nombre es Ana Lepure, consultora de la agencia en México, y tendré el gusto de moderar la sesión y me acompaña David Morgado, analista de energía en el programa de eficiencia energética en economías emergentes de la agencia, y quien es el presentador del día de hoy. El webinar será impartido en idioma inglés, pero podrán enviar sus preguntas y comentarios en español. Muy bien, la agenda del día de hoy. Tenemos la introducción, unas palabras de bienvenida por Santiago Cregueras, el director general de Eficiencia y Sustentabilidad Energética de la CENER, una introducción sobre el proceso de revisión de la IEA, un resumen de los principales indicadores energéticos y de eficiencia energética, actores relevantes, principales políticas sectoriales, así como las recomendaciones hechas a ellas, comentarios generales y después tendremos tiempo para preguntas y respuestas. Nos gustaría mucho escucharlos e incluirlos de una forma más activa en la sesión, así que por favor hagan preguntas y compartan sus comentarios. Así podremos discutirlos al final del webinar en la sección de preguntas y respuestas. Para ello, antes de iniciar el webinar, nos gustaría comentar algunos aspectos de la configuración del webinar y mostrar cómo pueden participar en la sesión de hoy. La diapositiva muestra un ejemplo de la interfaz de la plataforma, que deberían de estar viendo algo similar en su computadora. Por default, ustedes se han unido al webinar de hoy escuchando por los altavoces de su computadora. Esto significa que si por lo general pueden escuchar música en su computadora, usted será capaz de escuchar la presentación. Si desea llamar utilizando el teléfono, localice su panel de audio en la pantalla y seleccione Usar teléfono. Enseguida se mostrará la información de acceso telefónico y el código de acceso. El número y código de acceso se indican en esta diapositiva. También tiene la posibilidad de hacer preguntas usando su panel de preguntas. Simplemente ingrese su pregunta en inglés o español y haga clic en enviar. Al final de la presentación vamos a dar tiempo para la discusión y contestar las preguntas que se hayan realizado durante la presentación. Tome en cuenta que estaremos grabando el webinar y lo subiremos a nuestro canal de YouTube. Para ello, si se han perdido de la sesión el día de hoy o por si desea compartirlo con colegas o le gustaría volver a verlo. Para aquellos que usualmente asisten a nuestros webinars, hoy presentaremos un nuevo elemento en el webinar para permitir mayor interacción. Haremos preguntas rápidas, tipo quiz, durante el webinar para que podamos obtener sus opiniones sobre ciertos aspectos de la presentación y de la información presentada. Se les otorgará alrededor de 30 segundos para contestar. Habrá una encuesta rápida al inicio y al final y se le pedirá que seleccione una respuesta de 4 opciones. Los resultados serán inmediatos y podemos discutirlos brevemente y compartirlos durante la presentación. Si no tienen ninguna pregunta hasta este momento, procederemos a dar las palabras de bienvenida del maestro Santiago Cregueras, director general de Eficiencia y Sustentabilidad Energética de la CENER.
Hello, good morning everyone. Muy buenos días a todos. David, thank you for your support as always, and thanks for all of the support from the International Energy Agency. As you all know, this has become a very important practice for Mexico and CENER. Y bueno, pues nos da mucho gusto a todos darles la más cordial bienvenida a este webinar sobre las recomendaciones de la Agencia Internacional de Energía en materia de eficiencia energética. Tuvimos algunos problemas de conexión, pero bueno, ya estamos ahora listos para poner el webinar en marcha. Una de las acciones más importantes que se han realizado a lo largo de esta administración han sido las que se encuentran relacionadas con la eficiencia energética. Y bueno, pues qué mejor que el día de hoy escuchemos las mejores prácticas que la agencia tiene que compartir y promover en la materia. Me da mucho gusto en nombre de CENER darles la más cordial bienvenida. Sé que hay participantes que nos están escuchando y siguiendo en todo México e incluso más allá de las fronteras de México, así que pues todos sean bienvenidos con el agradecimiento de siempre por parte de la Secretaría y de la Agencia Internacional de Energía. Empezamos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Santiago, por tus palabras y por todo tu apoyo para organizar estos webinars, a ti y a todo tu equipo de la Dirección de Sustentabilidad Energética de la CENER. Es un gran placer estar aquí con ustedes. Ahora paso la palabra a mi colega David Morgado para iniciar la sesión del día de hoy. David.
Thank you, Ana and Santiago, especially for CENER and all their support in organizing these webinars. This is our 15th webinar, and we're fortunate to have at least 230 people on the line which are very interested in this topic that we're discussing today on energy efficiency. It's a pleasure to be here today as a presenter. I'm usually one of the moderators, and also it's a pleasure to be here as one of the contributors to the energy efficiency chapter of Mexico's in-depth review report, which is what will be the main theme of the presentation today. As Ana mentioned, my name is David Morgado. I work at the IEA's Energy Efficiency Division for the last 2.5 years, where I focus very much on supporting emerging economies, such as Mexico, on a range of energy efficiency topics and policies. Prior to working at the IEA, I was designing and implementing energy efficiency projects across Asia Pacific and Africa for many multilateral development agencies. So starting in the first slide, I've got here on energy efficiency, Mexico's first fuel. And this is a statement that I'd like to leave and we'll get back to through the presentation and also at the end. Mexico has committed to an ambitious international goal on climate change under the Paris Agreement. But how is this goal going to be actually met by 2030? Furthermore, Mexico's energy transition law, which provides a framework for clean energy, energy efficiency, and greenhouse gas emission reduction in the electricity sector in Mexico, has set a new total final energy consumption intensity target up to 2050. There's no doubt that energy efficiency is a critical component to meeting Mexico's climate goals and energy transition, making it by far Mexico's first fuel. But how do we get there? First of all, it's important to mention that energy efficiency is not getting enough attention from policymakers around the world. At the IEA's Energy Efficiency Division, we have tried to highlight how energy efficiency can deliver multiple benefits beyond the standard energy savings and greenhouse gas emissions, and support as well economic and social development. And as you can see on the slide, we've got this, what we call the multiple benefits flower, which highlights some of the many multiple benefits that energy efficiency can deliver. For example, energy efficiency can help reduce new generation capacity and energy prices. It can support industrial competitiveness and productivity. By improving the insulation of your homes, we can help reduce household electricity bills, improving their disposable income to invest back in the economy and improve their quality of life and comfort. IEA launched a publication in 2014 called Capturing the Multiple Benefits of Energy Efficiency, which I recommend and is available for free on our website and it goes into more detail on each of these multiple benefits. So let's have an introduction on the IEA's in-depth review process and structure. I'm doing this because it gives you details on how the energy efficiency recommendations that I'm presenting here today were developed, and it's important to explain why and how these recommendations were identified in the first place. So as you probably, many of you know, Mexico is in the process of joining the IEA upon a formal request by Minister Caldwell in November 2015. But in order to become an IEA member, there are several requirements that need to be met. One of which is to conduct an in-depth review of the energy policies, what we call an IDR, and it's done every 4 to 5 years. The objective really is to assess member countries' performance towards the objectives and principles to which IEA members countries have subscribed. These are known as the IEA shared goals. It's basically, as I've got in point number 2 and 3, it's a peer review conducted by policy experts from IEA member countries and from the Nuclear Energy Agency for countries which have nuclear power, and it's supported by the IEA Secretariat. For example, there's typically a country expert on natural gas, there's one on oil, there's one on natural gas, and so on. For Mexico, the sector experts were from Canada, Norway, United States, Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark. As part of the review, the peer reviewers in IEA undertake policy analysis in the areas of energy efficiency, energy diversification, so on electricity, natural gas, coal, renewable energy sources, as well as the integration of environmental concerns into energy policies. It's a useful process to allow us to identify opportunities for improvement and for monitoring progress in the subsequent in-depth review process, as well as share experience among IEA member countries. So it's a very useful report in that aspect. The last point. Under the IEA's Energy Efficiency in Emerging Economies program, funded by the Danish government and the European Commission, we are fortunate to be able to work with CENER and CONUE on several energy efficiency topics, some of which included in these recommendations, such as the building energy codes and standards, as well as supporting CENER with their national policies and targets. As you can see from the slide, there's the Mexico in-depth review report is now available on the IEA website for free in English, and I understand that it will be available in Spanish soon. So how's the process done? First of all, there is an the in-depth review is usually carried out within 1 year period, and it's one of the core activities of the IEA. A standard questionnaire is first given to CENER with questions on energy policies and measures by sector, and asks questions on existing targets and progress in meeting those. And usually these are shared amongst different ministries which have influence or have work on energy efficiency. Secondly, the team then of peer reviewers then visits the country, and it's usually in 1 week duration, and it's the central event of the entire in-depth review process. The team has a series of meetings with governments, industry, and other parties who play an important role in developing and implementing their national energy policy. The meetings include government representatives, industry stakeholders, as well as industry associations and NGOs and academia. So basically the recommendations which I'll present shortly are based on what we heard from the government and other key stakeholders. Then at the end of the visit, usually on a Friday, the team presents their preliminary findings and recommendations to the Ministry of Energy, CENER. The country is then able to respond to the recommendations either at the end of the week in person or 2 weeks after the final meeting in writing or both. As previously mentioned, the recommendations are in line with IEA's shared goals, which are very briefly summarized in the table below. As you can see, energy security, economic development, environmental protection. After the visit is completed, the IEA team prepares the draft and it goes through subsequent reviews and revisions within the peer review team as well as with the country focal points. A final draft is then presented and discussed at the IEA Standing Group on Long-Term Cooperation, which was established to encourage cooperation among IEA member countries on policies such as economic efficiency of the energy sector, promote environmental protection in the provision of energy services, and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The reviewed country, in this case Mexico, had to say if they agreed with the report, and if yes, it was subsequently finalized. The Mexico in-depth review report, as I mentioned, was formally launched on the 28th of February 2017. And this is a basic structure of the report. As you can see, I just wanted to highlight the key topics that have been analyzed, and it's basically divided into 3 parts. Part 1 being the policy analysis, Part 2 sector analysis, and Part 3 energy technology. And my presentation today will focus particularly on energy efficiency under Part 1 policy analysis. To start, it's worth going through the relevant energy and energy efficiency indicators and trends for Mexico from the last 10-30 years and how these support our recommendations to enable Mexico to reach its ambitious climate and energy intensity goals. But first of all, I'd like to interact with you and launch a quick poll to get your views. So the question I have here is, which sector should be a priority for energy efficiency? So if you only had a certain amount of funding and had to choose which sector or sectors would be your priority for implementation of energy efficiency, which of the 4 options would you choose? Would you choose A, transport, B, industry, C, buildings and appliances, or would you divide that funding across all sectors in option D, all? I'll give you about 30 seconds to respond, and then I'll mention the results. So you should be able to see now a question poll on your screen, as Anna mentioned. So if you can choose your option, and then I'll just mention the results. Okay, so we've got the results. So 39% of people referred transport, 34% mentioned all, 17% industry, and finally at the end 10% buildings. And I think you should be able to see some of these results on your screen. I'll then ask you, after I'll share all the information I have on the energy efficiency recommendations, and we'll show you, I'll ask the question again and see if I get the same response. So going on to the next slide. So this slide here shows the total primary energy supply and gross domestic product in Mexico from 1990 till 2014. And on the y-axis on the left side, we'll have the total primary energy supply measured in kilotons of oil equivalent. And then here on the right side, y-axis, you've got the gross domestic product measured in billion US dollars at 2010 exchange rates using purchase parity. And what is interesting to see is the total primary energy supply and the gross domestic product have followed a very similar trend, with, of course, with some exception in during the economic crisis. It's been consistent development growth. Overall, total primary energy supply was 4.9% higher in 2015 than in 2005. Interestingly, fossil fuels account for 90% of the total primary energy supply in 2015, mostly consisting of oil with 48%, natural gas with 35%, and then coal with 7%. Compared to 2005, the share of fossil fuels in total supply grew marginally from 88%, albeit with a partial shift from oil use towards more gas use. And I'll show a bit more slides in detail on that. Comparatively, the GDP has followed a similar trend, and Mexico is still among the few OECD countries that have not yet decoupled total primary energy supply from economic growth over the past decade. However, in terms of total primary energy supply per capita, it's a different story. It remains one of the lowest of IEA member countries, but this is likely to change in the future with expected economic growth. And as you can see there, Mexico is at the end with a rate of 1.5 ton of oil equivalent per capita per year, which is roughly similar to Turkey's rate. In terms of total final energy consumption, here you can see by sector. So you can see industry, transport, residential, and commercial sectors. And on the y-axis is the ton of oil equivalent and million tons of oil equivalent. And you can see from 1973 till 2014. The total final energy consumption represents around 62% of the total primary energy supply that I presented earlier. It has increased by 15% from 2004 to 2014, experiencing strong growth in the 10 years from 2008 to and 5.1% downturn in 2009, as you can see here, because of the economic crisis. Transport is the largest consuming sector with a share of 43% here in 2014. Transport demand increased by 23% from 2005 to 2015, and it's growing at a faster rate than the overall total final energy consumption. This is a high share of the transport sector is the legacy of historic low fuel costs and the relatively easy access to car ownership, partially thanks to the cross-border flow of used vehicles from the United States. The industry sector is the second largest consuming sector with 34% of demand. Demand in the sector increased by 12% over the 10 years to 2015. While the residential sector, much lower there, accounts for 15% of energy demand. Demand by the sector has remained relatively unchanged over the past decade, and as such, its share in total final energy consumption has fallen slightly. This could potentially indicate that residential energy efficiency policies, particularly minimum energy performance standards, have been particularly effective. Finally, the commercial and public services sector, including agriculture, fishing, and forestry, is the smallest consuming sector with 8% of total final energy consumption in 2014. However, demand in this sector is the fastest growing, up by 36% during 2005-2015. Overall, in the last couple of years, energy intensity has plateaued, which could be a reflection of the national energy intensity target set in 2014, of keeping at least the same energy intensity as 2012. On my next slide, I've got the energy intensity in Mexico and its selected IEA member countries from 1973 till 2015. And this is measured in total primary energy supply divided by the GDP, real gross domestic product at 2010 prices and adjusted for purchasing power parity. So for Mexico, the value was 0.09 in 2015. The ratio is lower than the IEA average of 0.11 and the IEA North America average of 0.14. To reach the climate and intensity goals, it'll have to improve at a much higher rate than before in Mexico. The other thing I'd like to note when presenting energy intensity figures is it's often used as a proxy for energy efficiency. However, it's not an ideal indicator since a country with a low energy intensity does not necessarily have high efficiency. For instance, a small service-based country with a mild climate would certainly have much lower intensity than a large industry-based country with a very cold climate, even if energy is more efficiently consumed in this country than in the first. Energy efficiency is definitely a contributing factor in intensity, but there are many other elements, often even more significant, that need to be considered. These include, for example, the structure of the economy. So, for example, the presence of large energy consuming industries, for instance, the size of the country, higher demand for transport sector, for example, the climate, for example, higher demand for heating or cooling, and finally the exchange rate. So again, I'll repeat it. It's the structure of the economy, the size of the country, the climate, and the exchange rate, which are also important factors besides efficiency. So now that we've gone through all those numbers, one of the areas that we covered in the report was the key stakeholders and main energy efficiency policies. And I want to give you a quick overview and closer look at these key stakeholders, some of which were interviewed during the in-depth review process, and also highlight the main energy efficiency policies to indicate where there are gaps and opportunities. This is a very important part of the in-depth review to map the institutional and policy framework on energy efficiency in Mexico. So as you can see here, there's several stakeholders involved in energy efficiency, which make it its actual implementation particularly challenging and requiring significant cross-sectoral coordination, and this is common amongst all countries. The report provides a more detailed overview of each of these organizations and their state of play on energy efficiency. Another thing I'd like to mention, for example, that recently just for building energy codes and standards in Mexico, we counted at least 65 stakeholders that should be involved, ranging from federal to local governments to private sector and academia. It's important to note that there's an advisory council for energy transition, which is a permanent body that advises SENER on the necessary actions to comply with the national goals of energy efficiency and clean energy, as well as on the content of other planning instruments. This council meets twice a year at least, or whenever requested by SENER. In terms of main energy efficiency policies and funds, these are detailed in the report, but I'll quickly give an overview. Energy efficiency policy of Mexico is very closely aligned with the National Development Plan. Based on its national goal, Mexico Prospero, Objective 4.6, which seeks to promote energy efficiency throughout the productive chain. In addition, energy efficiency actions are set according to the Energy Sectoral Program, POSNER, with the objective of expanding clean and renewable energy use, promoting energy efficiency and social environmental responsibility. Furthermore, as a result of the energy reform, the energy transition law represents a major keystone in Mexico's new legislation on clean energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable use of energy. The law establishes the obligation to create a long-term clean energy and energy efficiency goals regarding the total generation and consumption of clean energy electricity in Mexico, as well as measures on sustainable use of energy. The implementation is guided by 3 instruments: the transition strategy to promote the use of cleaner technologies and fuels, which was published in December 2nd of 2016, the special program for energy transition was in the process of being published this year, and finally the national program for sustainable use of energy, which was updated 19th of January 2017, and it's known as PRONAZE. Starting with the first one, the transition strategy to promote the use of cleaner technologies and fuels is now the main strategy of the national energy policy. This strategy is aimed at boosting the national energy transition and delivering an efficient and low-carbon economy and society. The strategy will include medium, 15-year, and long-term, 30-year action lines. These actions comprise a shared responsibility of the three levels of government, private and academic sectors, and society in general. The second one, the Special Program for Energy Transition, will spell out the specifics of implementing clean energy goals and other action lines identified in the above-mentioned energy transition strategy to boost the development of clean distributed generation facilities, regulatory incentives to ensure compliance with the clean energy goals, and finally analysis of economic viability. Then we have the National Program for Sustainable Energy Use, PRONASE, which establishes the strategies and objectives, the actions and targets to achieve optimal use of energy in all processes, activities for exploration, production, processing, distribution, and consumption. This program should contain the energy efficiency goal and on this sense should be updated soon, as I mentioned. The roadmap of energy efficiency is the guide for implementing actions to meet the energy efficiency targets established in PRONASE in accordance with its energy transition law. And this roadmap contains strategies to achieve the final energy intensity reduction of 1.9% from 2016 to 2030 and 3.1% from 2030 to 2050. Moving on to the terms of funding mechanisms, the Mexican government has established two main funds for energy efficiency. The Fund for Energy Transition and Sustainable Energy Use, known as FOTEASE, financed 33 projects from 2009 to mid-2015 with more than 8.7 billion Mexican pesos, of which approximately 75% was for funding energy efficiency projects. The Sustainable Energy Fund, mentioned in the next point, was created in 2008, but only a small percentage has been used for energy efficiency. For example, in 2013, only 2% of the budget was used for energy efficiency projects, and it was worth 52.8 million pesos. The Program for Energy Savings in the Electricity Sector, PEASE, which is managed by the CFE, the Federal Electricity Commission, covers a number of areas such as clean energy and energy efficient technologies. The available budget was approximately 45 million pesos per year last year and the previous year. In addition to these instruments, CONUE has an annual work plan which classifies action lines and strategies according to sectoral, transversal, and support programs. And for those who don't know, CONUE is basically the energy efficiency agency in Mexico. So now moving to the main part of the webinar today, where we'll have a closer look at energy efficiency policies by sector in Mexico and present IEA's recommendations. I'd like to stress that it's important to note that the in-depth review is mostly based on 1 week only, where the peer reviewers meet with key stakeholders in Mexico. It's impossible to cover all the issues, and the aim is not to provide hundreds of recommendations to the Mexican government. So starting with probably one of the most important sectors, based on the indicators that I showed, as transport currently represents the highest total final energy consumption in Mexico. In terms of existing policies and programs, fuel economy standards are one of the most important policies to improve efficiency in the transport sector. Transport efficiency is mainly stimulated by improvements in light-duty vehicle fuel economy standards, including a local standard that's issued by the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, SEMARNAT, the Ministry of Economy, and CONUE to regulate fuel efficiency and restrict pollution emission levels of light vehicles. These standards are technically related to those in the United States, but they are less stringent. And the second point, in an effort to internalize a culture of energy efficiency into public entities, the Mexican government has provided technical support to the development of public vehicle fleets, including those through energy management systems, training and dissemination of best practices. For example, in 2015, actions accounted for assistance of 268 entities and obtaining a remarkable fuel saving of 17.4 million liters of fuel, mainly gasoline and diesel. And then finally, of course, improving urban mobility through public transport, such as the Metrobus in Mexico City and other cities in Mexico. So moving on in terms of the recommendations, and although I didn't highlight an extensive number of programs, there are other things going on in electrical mobility as well as improving railroad efficiency. But I thought these were some of the main ones, and I'd like to highlight some of the recommendations that we have, and based on the peer reviews team expertise. First one of the most important ones, Mexico is currently considering adopting energy efficiency standards for heavy-duty vehicles. And these standards were difficult to implement in general, and in Mexico in particular, because the category includes a large diversity of vehicle types, as the feasibility of the suggested standard is related to the availability of low-sulfur diesel. In this respect, opening the market for new players to import finished oil products could offer new possibilities and enable improvements in air pollution levels in urban areas. This is quite an important area, and it's been a challenge at the moment in Mexico, and it's one that's very important. And the IEA has done some analysis on this under the Mexico Energy Outlook that was published in 2016. And we noticed that heavy good vehicles, which currently consume less than 50% of total transport energy demand in Mexico, they're expected to account for more than half of the increase in transport fuel consumption by 2040. So this is very significant. Therefore, it's important to set a time frame for adopting the standards for heavy-duty vehicles in Mexico. The second point I have there, harmonizing standards for light-duty vehicles with the United States to more stringent levels. This will help improve Mexico's energy security, help reduce air pollution, lower fuel costs for the consumers, and it could help achieve higher economies of scale in vehicle manufacturing in Mexico. Third point I have there, at present, Mexico doesn't have an energy efficiency label for vehicles. CONUE has a considerable amount of fuel use data of different car types at its disposal, and it publishes this on its website. It would be relatively easy to develop a labeling system, of course provided that the car manufacturers were to cooperate with such an initiative, which could be overseen by three ministries: the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, SEMARNAT, and CENER, the Ministry of Energy. This would enable consumers to make their choices more easily and better informed. And then the final point on second-hand vehicles from the US. Tighter regulation and control on second-hand vehicles coming from the United States would be important to ensure that these meet existing national standards in Mexico and would potentially be particularly effective at addressing many of the challenges in terms of air pollution. So here, as you can see below, I've got the quote I mentioned on the Mexico Energy Outlook and the analysis we did on heavy-duty vehicles. And this report, as I mentioned, is available online. So moving on to the industry sector. Industry, as I mentioned, has the highest total final energy consumption after transport. Overall, energy efficiency measures have been relatively limited, focusing on energy audits and providing recommendations in private and public industrial facilities. There's also very limited interaction between industry and the energy service companies in market, the ESCO market. So providing you with an overview of the existing policies and programs, and again focusing on some of the main ones. The first one, there's a requirement for high energy consumers, usuarios con patrón de alto consumo de energía, UPAC, to report their annual energy information as well as energy efficiency measures implemented. However, the program has had limited impact and was revised in 2014 to a more strict number of high energy consumers, and therefore reducing its potential benefits. And I'll talk a bit more about that in our recommendations. Secondly, the government is also fostering the application of energy management systems through the National Program for Energy Management Systems, PRONASY. This program is accompanied by learning networks to facilitate the implementation of energy management systems. Currently, the first learning network considers a formal agreement with 8 large companies from different sectors. Thirdly, energy consumption by small and medium-sized enterprises constitutes a quarter of total industry consumption. As in other countries, SMEs often lack awareness, quality data, and resources to manage their energy consumption. However, with the Eco Business Credit Program implemented by the Trust Fund for Electricity Savings, FIDE, it provides preferential loans to SMEs to replace inefficient equipment such as refrigerators, air conditioners. In addition, CONUE provides technical guidance to help identify potential energy-saving measures. Finally, and probably one of the most important policies, are the standards, what you call norms in Mexico, which were set for motors, electric motors in 2004, 2014, and 2016, and are closely harmonized with the US. These basically ensure that electric motors imported and sold in Mexico meet a minimum energy performance, providing significant benefits to the consumers, and I'll explain why that is so important in my next slide. However, according to the peer reviewers, there are still many areas for improvement. As I mentioned, the UPAC needs to be reviewed to enable the implementation of a greater number of energy efficiency measures, which can provide benefits to energy-intensive industries in terms of increased competitiveness and productivity. And I think these are the main selling points that we should be aiming when talking to industries: competitiveness and productivity through efficiency. Further efficiency gains could be achieved by improving efficiency in motor-driven systems, which in general represents 69% of electricity consumption in the industrial sector. And again, I'll explain this in more detail in the next slides. Finally, based on the peer reviewers, the government's efforts to introduce voluntary energy management systems are commendable and should be further accelerated by increased technical support and energy audits, together with adequate incentives and regulations. With regards to the FIDE's Eco Business Credit Program, it's unclear whether or not the threshold, which is used in the program, is set in the way that ensures that replaced equipment represents optimal saving potential for SMEs. There's a need for additional evaluation tools that should be developed to optimize the use of these resources, but the challenge there is that, on the other hand, is that there's further data collection capabilities that would be needed for SMEs. So as I mentioned, why do we see as electric motors are particularly important? This graph here shows the global total final electricity consumption by end use in 2014. And as you can see there, in green are buildings, in red transport, in yellow agriculture, and in industry in blue. And as you can see there, the share of motors in all of these sectors is 53%, and it's particularly important in the industrial sector and all of the transport sector as well. Motors are used to drive pumps, fans, compressed air systems, material handling, processing systems, and more. And their size can range from very small to higher output that is higher than heavy-duty trucks. In the building sector, for example, electric motors are part of main household appliances upon which people rely every day, such as refrigerators, washing machines, air conditioners, fans, and computers, for example. And they account for about a third of electricity consumption in buildings, so very significant. In the agricultural sector, electric motors are used to drive irrigation pumps, and in the transport sector, electric motors are used in electric vehicles, rail transport, and pipeline compressors. Currently, the industry sector and the building sector together account for over 90% of electricity consumption by motors, with the rest consumed in agriculture and transport. So you can see there is pretty significant. This is the reason why standards on energy efficiency motors are extremely important policy, and these standards should continue to be updated on a regular basis in Mexico. But now, as I mentioned, looking into why are electric motor-driven systems even more important? And what does that mean? 30% of global electricity is consumed in electric motor systems, but they are typically part of a larger system. So far, policymakers have, in their efforts to control electricity consumption in industrial motors, focused on putting in place minimum energy performance standards on the motor itself, as I mentioned in my previous slide. But the majority of electricity savings in electric motor systems can often be found not in the motor itself, but elsewhere in the system. Typically, the electricity losses incurring in the electric motor are only a minor share of the total electricity losses in the entire system the motor is driving, as you can see in the slide. To visualize a typical industrial motor system, you can think of a connected range of system components: the electric motor, the end-use device, for example, a pump, and the other system components, such as coupling between the motor and the end-use device, the control system, the pipes or the valves, as you can see here. The efficiency of each component is important to the efficiency of the entire system. Generally, electric motors are already fairly efficient. You can see here 95%, 96% in this example, meaning that further improvements to the motor affect the efficiency of the system only marginally. On the other hand, the efficiency of the driven equipment often leaves much more room for improvement. You can see how the comparison here by adding a variable speed drive, by improving the efficiency of the end-use device and efficiency of other system-wide measures, can contribute significantly to the efficiency of the overall electric motor-driven system. This is the reason why I think improving efficiency in both motors and motor-driven systems are essential and should be addressed. So moving on to the final sector, which is buildings and appliance sector. Buildings account for approximately 25% of Mexico's total final energy consumption in 2014, while appliances and equipment represent around 20% of energy consumption in buildings. Urbanization, growth in the service sector, increased wealth are likely to drive energy consumption further, providing significant challenges for Mexico to keep improving efficiency in buildings and appliances. For example, according to IEA analysis, air conditioning can represent up to 50% of energy consumption in buildings, depending on the regional climatic conditions. And the penetration of air conditioners is likely to increase significantly in the near future in Mexico. In the past and more recently, there have been a series of policies and programs in Mexico that have been very successful. Currently, there are 30 energy efficiency standards, of which 15 are related to appliances. The standards for appliances, known as norms, as I mentioned, all include specifications and mandatory minimum energy performance levels for each appliance type. According to the IEA, mandatory standards are one of the most effective energy efficiency policies in the world. And recently, CONUE has published a series of publications that highlight the importance of these standards in Mexico. The second point, in addition, a voluntary energy labeling program, SILUFIDE, has been introduced for 29 products, including appliances, building components, to certify their high efficiency and quality. Thirdly, the Mexican government has also implemented an efficient lighting and appliances project to promote the adoption of energy efficient technologies such as CFLs. And this project concluded in 2015. Approximately 45.8 million incandescent bulbs were replaced with CFLs in 11.3 million households in Mexico, resulting in an estimated savings of almost 7,000 gigawatt hours. The project also replaced a total of 1.9 million refrigerators and air conditioners, resulting in an estimated savings of 2,500 gigawatt hours. And finally, in addition to these efforts, the government has implemented a national energy efficiency municipal public lighting project to enable street lighting retrofits in municipalities. And there's a number of other programs that I wasn't able to include all of them, but there's a series of other programs that have been relevant, such as the Federal Public Administration Program, where I mentioned some of the savings that they achieved in the transport sector, as well as the Green Mortgage Program, Hipoteca Verde, and other programs on buildings such as Ecocasa, CCVive, the FIPA-TERM program, and others. And those are in more detail in the report. In terms of recommendations from the peer review team, given that the limited resources available to the government, maximizing the impact of existing regulatory frameworks, such as the standards for building components, is of great importance. While the government is in charge of setting the standards, the states and municipalities are in charge of adopting and enforcing the building energy codes and standards. Mandatory standards exist for building components, including building envelopes, but they have not been sufficiently enforced, owing to the lack of awareness of efficiency, institutional resources and capabilities in states and municipalities, and their communication with the federal government. The second point there, according to the peer reviewers and the feedback that they received regarding the Selo Fide, in practice the adoption of the stamp, the label, by producers is limited to between 10 and 15% of all products. And it remains unclear whether or not the efficiency thresholds used in the program are structured in a way that certified products represent the top tier group in efficiency, the higher group, suggesting that maybe some FIDE labeled products may not necessarily represent competitive efficiency or provide sufficient efficiency benefits to consumers based on their cost. However, for some products such as liquid crystal display television, efficiency standards in the Selo Fide are compared to those of the Energy Star program in the United States and Canada. And my final point there is, it should be noted that Mexico currently doesn't have a norm for televisions in general, although they are included in the standard that limits standby power, and they're included in the mandatory labeling, which is very important. But you might be thinking, why are televisions important? And I'll explain that in my next slide. This is taken from the IEA's Energy Efficiency Market Report 2016, which is also available for free on our website, and looks at a series of appliances. And here you can see the global energy consumption trends by appliance type from 2000 to 2015. And on the left side, the graph shows the different, the cumulative energy impacts from different appliances, with the biggest one, of course, being refrigerators, which has decreased, dishwashers, clothes dryers, clothes washers, freezers, and television. But the television, as you can see, it hasn't gone down. It actually has gone on up. And interestingly, here on the graph on the right, you can see the energy consumption of televisions in the solid line and how that's gone up. And you can see that the television size also has been going up as well. So basically the standards across the world haven't been able to address the energy consumption of televisions, and that has been led to grow. So I think the message here is very clear that even if the consumption of an appliance is particularly low, if you see that the trend is going to increase, that highlights the importance of introducing standards. So it's always very important when you're setting standards that you look not only at the current status, but also project what will happen in the future. So overall, the improved energy efficiency of 4 of the 5 major appliances has resulted in a net decrease in their energy consumption, which at televisions are the exception. A technology shift and resulting lower TV prices have enabled higher TV ownership and growth in screen size, such that the energy consumption trends outpace the energy savings from efficiency gains from 1990 to 2011, as you can see in that graph. An encouraging flattening and decreasing energy consumption trend since 2011 is seen with the emergence of LED lit televisions, another benefit of LED lighting technology improvements. So that's why I think the adoption of standards will help drive further improvements in the energy efficiency of televisions. And finally, we have general recommendations, basically that cover all sector, or what we call cross-sectoral policies. Most of these recommendations are quite important and are related to the support that are needed for energy efficiency policies and the effective market operation on energy efficiency. The first point I have there is the good quality and disaggregated data on energy end use on the demand side and activity are very essential for designing energy efficiency policy, as well as support the expansion of existing programs based on their cost effectiveness. In Mexico, there's a need for a significant effort to improve demand-side data collection, and CONUE is making a significant effort in this area, but there's a need for more resources and funding, as well as cross-sector support from both public and private stakeholders, particularly to overcome the challenges of data confidentiality. Secondly, meeting new and ambitious national climate change targets and uncovering the remaining energy efficiency potential will require additional efforts, as I mentioned, particularly in the transport and industrial sectors. Energy efficiency can make a significant contribution to meeting these targets. It's therefore important to set energy efficiency policies and strategies that are in line with these goals. The official energy efficiency goals of 2012 reflect a rather low ambitions, namely keeping energy intensity level at 2012 levels. Today, energy efficiency activities highly depend on government support, which exposes them to a risk of decline at times of federal budget cuts, as we're seeing now. The new energy transition strategy now establishes more ambitious goals on energy efficiency, which hopefully will help raise the profile of energy efficiency within the government and beyond. Thirdly, and probably very important, significant electricity price subsidies persist in the residential and agricultural sectors in 2014, and they've diverted a total of $6 billion in state resources. Subsidies on electricity cover up to between 60 to 70% of total costs in certain residential tariff categories. So these artificial low electricity prices are likely to hamper government efforts to pursue efficiency. And as I showed in the multiple benefits flower in the beginning of my presentation, removing electricity subsidies could bring a range of multiple benefits. A gradual phase out of electricity subsidies could help suppress the wasteful use of electricity, in particular in the residential and agricultural sectors. It could serve to increase consumer awareness of energy efficiency and provide better price signals to justify efficiency investments. And it hopefully would encourage consumers to buy more efficient products. Phasing out of the subsidies would also have a positive environmental and budgetary impact, and there are several studies from CONUE showcasing the benefits of norms in reducing government subsidy budget. Finally, my last point, there's a significant dependence on government funding for energy efficiency, and therefore it would be important to set up a dedicated fund for energy efficiency, as the other funds that are mentioned in my presentation also apply for renewable energy, and so there's a lot of competition there. And it'd be important to implement a market-based mechanism to trigger investment from private sector and ESCO market, particularly in the transport and industry sectors. So now, based on this, I'd like to launch the second poll and ask you which sectors do you feel, based on these recommendations, should be the priority. And if you had to choose which sector would it be, would you choose A again, transport, B, industry, C, buildings and appliances, or would you again divide the funding across all sectors in option D? And I'll give you about 30 seconds to respond to that. Just bear with me while I launch the questionnaire. So you'll probably be seeing now the results, and very interestingly, in the first poll we asked, the first one was transport with 38%, but in this case now it's changed. It's actually 30% for transport, and what's coming in first is 43%, and then followed by transport with 30%, as I mentioned, industry with 18%, and 9% for buildings and appliances. So basically, through the presentation, more people are thinking that investment and efforts in all the sectors are very relevant, and transport would move on to second place, but still transport really very relevant. So just to conclude, I just did a quick exercise on prioritizing the recommendations, and unfortunately I wasn't able to, as probably most of you would like, to have all the recommendations in the quick poll so you could choose. However, I attempted to do a priority list based on our work on energy efficiency in Mexico, and these are basically the four I would select. The first one on improving energy efficiency data indicators, as I feel these would be very important to support decision making, designing the best policies, and also evaluating the impact of the existing ones. Updating and expanding fuel economy standards in the second point, and labeling for light and heavy duty vehicles, particularly as the transport sector has the highest total final energy consumption, and also because of a lot of the issues that many of the cities in Mexico suffer in terms of air pollution. Third point, updating and expanding appliance standards, including televisions and motors. Most effective, it's by far, as I mentioned, the most effective energy efficiency policy, and that should be including standards for televisions, but also standards for industrial appliances such as motors. And finally, one of the major challenges in Mexico, and which I think is very important with the population and economic growth, is the adoption and enforcement of building energy codes by local governments, and it's a major area of concern, as if this continues at the current rate, it could lead to higher electricity costs for consumers if it's not addressed now, as more and more inefficient buildings are being built at the moment. So just to conclude, energy efficiency, Mexico's first fuel, as I mentioned in the beginning, that there's no doubt that energy efficiency is Mexico's first fuel. I have highlighted several priority policies for energy efficiency that can help the Mexican government reach and even surpass its ambitious climate change goals by 2030. However, these policies need to be designed and implemented in the short term, particularly in the transport industry sectors. And I'd like to mention here that the IEA is one of the several partners that are available to support Mexico and SENER and CONUE and others in this process and transition. I'd like to thank you for your attention. We are now going to be moving to the Q&A, where I'll again have the help of Anna Lepore and I think Adriana Aragon from SENER to answer some of your questions.
Gracias, David. Thank you, David. The information presented is very relevant and interesting. Tenemos algunas preguntas que nos hicieron llegar aquí en el chat. Vamos a ver. Están preguntando si el área de generación de energía y de producción de hidrocarburos es parte de las prioridades de la eficiencia energética, las recomendaciones. Creo que un punto relevante a dejar claro aquí es que sobre todo las recomendaciones de eficiencia energética están dadas en los sectores finales de consumo. Entonces está, como David lo comentó, sobre todo está en transporte, en industria, en aparatos y equipos. En todo caso, se conecta mucho con otra pregunta, si se identifica a Pemex como uno de los actores relevantes en la eficiencia energética, y uniéndolo a esta otra previa pregunta, por supuesto que es un actor relevante, pero sobre todo viendo a Pemex como una industria, ¿no? Tiene muchas áreas, mucho potencial para reducción del consumo de energía en sus propios procesos. Tenemos otra pregunta. David, no sé si nos quieras ayudar con cuál es el papel, la relevancia del the role for the local government on energy efficiency recommendations. Can you help us with that?
Thank you, Anna. That gave me a bit of a break to just have a bit of water and review some of the questions that we've received. So what's the role of local governments in these recommendations? As you probably noticed, and I think I mentioned, the recommendations we have presented are especially directed to the federal government. However, the role of local governments is vital for energy efficiency, particularly in the transport and building sector. For example, in the transport sector, local governments such as state and municipal governments can improve the local transport system, can promote shift of passengers and freight to more efficient modes. They're also responsible for the local transport infrastructure and urban planning and development, which will have implications on transport and energy demand. And in the building sector, as mentioned in the recommendations, local governments are essential for the adoption and enforcement of building energy codes and standards, which is currently not happening in Mexico despite the existence of a building energy code. SENER and CONUL will be actually launching a roadmap for building energy codes and standards, which highlights the key actions needed by local governments for greater adoption and enforcement of building energy codes. And I'm hoping we can do a more detailed webinar on this topic soon once the roadmap is launched next week. I'm seeing another question that I jotted down. The list of recommendations could be more comprehensive. Why are certain measures or certain agencies not covered, such as water and wastewater treatment? On that one, as I mentioned, the objective of the IEA's in-depth reviews is to provide a set of recommendations which can allow for progress to be made by the Mexican government every 4 or 5 years. So generally we tend to provide not more than 10 recommendations. We don't want to provide an overwhelming number of recommendations that then are difficult to track or to implement, so we want them to focus on some of the main ones. It's also important to note that the recommendations are ultimately based on the information that the peer reviewers received when meeting and interviewing all the stakeholders during just 1 week, and that the peer review team is covering a total of 10 energy-related sectors. So as you saw, climate change, oil, gas, electricity, nuclear power. So it's very challenging. But maybe in the wastewater and water treatment, I think there's a new municipal energy efficiency project led by SENER with the support from the World Bank that will be addressing water and wastewater losses and improvements in efficiency in pumps and motors in certain municipalities. I think of a total of 32 municipalities that are participating at the moment, but I think it can be extended to others. So that's the 2 ones that I've seen. I don't know if Anna, if there's any other questions that you would like to answer.
Sí, bueno, podríamos aprovechar 2 más. Preguntan también, que te puedo ayudar, David, preguntan si existe un cuadro con la Total Final Energy Consumption, el consumo final de la energía. Efectivamente, en el Balance Nacional de Energía pueden encontrar los datos de consumo por sectores. Algunos sectores están incluso divididos en subsectores y también pueden encontrar el tipo de energía consumido por cada sector. Otra pregunta también sobre información. Tenemos también un comentario sobre que el Instituto Nacional de Electricidad y Energías Limpias debería ser incluido para establecer programas de eficiencia energética y si se ha considerado. Actualmente la Secretaría de Energía tiene los Centros Mexicanos de Innovación en Energía, los CEMIES, y no existe una eficiencia energética, sin embargo está en proceso de creación, y sin duda el INEL, que es el Instituto Nacional de Electricidad y Energías Limpias, tomará un rol muy importante en ello, al igual que con el resto de los CEMIES. David, creo que ya nos pasamos del tiempo. Tenemos otros comentarios que por supuesto les vamos a contestar y se los enviamos por correo electrónico. Thank you, David, for your presentation. Les agradecemos a todos su atención y participación en el webinar de hoy. La presentación estará disponible a finales de esta semana en el canal de YouTube de la agencia. Les enviaremos a sus correos el enlace, así como la presentación del día de hoy. Por favor, siéntanse en la libertad de compartirlo con sus colegas. Para nosotros ha sido un placer llevar a cabo este webinar que esperamos lo haya encontrado útil y relevante. También agradecemos a CENER por todo su apoyo y ayuda para organizar estos webinars. Seguiremos organizando otras sesiones en eficiencia energética. El siguiente estará enfocado en la hoja de ruta para el Código y Normas de Eficiencia Energética para Edificaciones en México, como David lo comentó. Este documento, elaborado por la CENER y la CONUE con la colaboración de la IEA, la Agencia de Cooperación Alemana, la Agencia Danesa de Energía, el INEC, WRI México y CACEDI, será presentado el siguiente 30 de marzo en la Ciudad de México y por ello realizaremos un webinar de él potencialmente en el mes de abril o mayo. Los mantendremos informados y no duden en ponerse en contacto con nosotros si tienen alguna otra pregunta. Con ello les agradecemos nuevamente su asistencia y nos veremos en la siguiente sesión de las series de webinars en eficiencia energética entre la Agencia Internacional de Energía y la Secretaría de Energía en México. Bonito día a todos.